Really, they let people like you work here. The man scoffed loud enough for the whole store to hear. You should be hiding that thing, not waving it around in public. Emily Carter didn't flinch. She just scanned the groceries, her prosthetic leg clicking softly against the tile. She didn't argue. She didn't explain. She just stood there carrying more battles than anyone could see. And when the store went silent, when even the aisles seemed to hold their breath, one old man stepped forward, and with a voice that shook the whole town awake, he said 6 words that changed everything. If you believe real strength doesn't need perfect bodies, if you believe courage shows up in the quietest ways, stay with us. Because this story will change the way you see heroes forever. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. The town of Lakewood, Montana never rushed for anything. It rose with the sun stretched slow and easy and moved through its days like a river through old stones. At the heart of town stood Summit Market, a small, sturdy supermarket with scuffed linoleum floors and a bell over the door that sang every time someone entered. Mark Lawson wiped his hands on a towel behind the front desk, watching the quiet bustle of a Wednesday morning. He'd been the manager here for 6 years, long enough to know almost every face that walked through the door. Farmers, ranchers, teachers, young moms with kids swinging from carts. Lakewood was a place where you knew not just someone's name, but their story too. That was why Emily Carter stood out. Mark had hired her 3 months ago. She'd come in with a firm handshake, a no-nonsense smile, and a resume that simply listed U.S. Army veteran. She didn't talk much about herself, but it wasn't hard to see the story she carried. She moved with a slight stiffness, a carefulness in each step. And if you look closely, you'd notice the slight metallic click when she walked, the subtle tilt of her right leg. Prosthetic Mark had caught it the first day, but he hadn't asked Emily. Carter did her work with precision, scanning groceries with practiced hands, greeting customers with a soft, steady, "Good morning" or "Have a great day." She was reliable, polite, and utterly unshakable. In a town that respected hard work, she should have fit right in. But Mark noticed the looks. It started with little things, customers hesitating an extra second before choosing her line. A few whispering after they passed. Chawda once asked loudly why that lady had a robot leg. Mark handled it with a smile, offering the boy a lollipop and moving the conversation along. Emily had simply smiled as if it didn't touch her. But Mark knew better. He could see it in the small ways, the slight tightening of her mouth, the way she sometimes busied herself stacking paper bags even when there were no customers. She wasn't invisible, not really. People saw her, they just didn't know what to do with what they saw. This morning had been no different. Emily stood at register 2, neat in her Navy Summit Market polo shirt, her short brown hair tucked behind her ears. The prosthetic was visible. The hem of her jeans rode up slightly when she shifted her weight. Mark leaned on the counter, sipping coffee from his battered travel mug, pretending to check inventory while really keeping an eye on her. That's when it happened. "Hey, shouldn't you be working somewhere safer?" A man chuckled as he placed a gallon of milk on her conveyor belt. His voice carried light, but cutting. Emily didn't miss a beat. "I'm exactly where I need to be, sir," she said, scanning the milk. The man snorted, shaking his head as if it were some great joke. "Must be tough moving around like that. Slows down the line, don't it?" Mark's hand tightened around his mug. Emily just finished scanning, bagged his items, and wished him a good day, with the same calm voice. But Mark saw the way her hand hovered a little longer over the register, steadying herself. Customers nearby said nothing. A few looked down at their phones. Others just busied themselves examining a rack of gum or sunglasses. Silence filled the space like thick smoke. Mark wanted to step in. He wanted to throw the man out on his ear. But Emily had made it clear she didn't want protecting. She wanted working. Still, the words left a stain on the morning. The bell over the door jingled again, and Samuel Green walked in, carrying his usual battered leather wallet and wearing his old field jacket. Samuel was a fixture in Lakewood, a retired mailman who everyone liked. He made it a point to greet every cashier by name, to ask about their families, to leave a quarter in the take-a-penny jar even when he didn't need to. Samuel got in Emily's line. Mark watched heart tight. The man who'd made the rude comment was still nearby, leaning against a display of sodas, waiting for someone. Mark could hear him murmuring to another shopper, laughing under his breath. Emily rang up Samuel's bread, his eggs, his jar of peanut butter. She moved carefully but quickly. Efficient Samuel studied her for a long moment, his eyes not missing the metallic glint under. Under her jeans, ma'am, he said loud enough that the nearby customers, including the man at the soda display, could hear it. Emily paused. Looking up, you know? Samuel continued, voice steady. Some folks measure strength by how much they can lift. The store grew quieter. Mark set his coffee down, listening. But real strength, Samuel said, laying a gentle hand on the counter, is carrying pain every day and still standing up straight, still showing up, still smiling. A breath caught in Mark's chest. You, ma'am, Samuel finished, his voice thick with emotion, are the strongest person in this store, and don't you forget it. The man by the soda shifted uncomfortably. A woman holding a basket near the bakery bit her lip. Someone else cleared their throat. Emily's hands stilled on the register keys. Mark saw it, the way her shoulders, always so rigid, dropped just a little. The way her mouth trembled for a fraction of a second before she smiled, a real smile at Samuel. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice soft but clear. Samuel nodded once, paid for his groceries, and left the quarter in the jar with a soft clink. And just like that, the air shifted. The silence broke. A few customers nodded toward Emily as they passed. Someone murmured, thank you for your service. Another left a pack of flowers by her register without a word. Mark stood there behind the desk, chest swelling, knowing he had witnessed something important, something real. Today had started like any other day. But today Lakewood had seen one of its heroes, and they would never see her the same way again. The rest of the morning unfolded with an unusual hum of silence. People moved softer, spoke gentler. It wasn't just politeness, it was awareness. Emily's presence, once quietly skirted around, now stood undeniable in the center of Summit Market's daily rhythm. Mark kept working behind the service desk, pretending to sort invoices, but his eyes never strayed far from Register 2. He watched as Samuel Green's words rippled through the building like a dropped stone into still water. At first, it was small things. An elderly woman, her arms full of canned goods, chose Emily's line, even though Melissa's was short. She smiled at Emily, truly smiled, and said, "Thank you for being here." Emily blinked, caught off guard, then nodded with a soft, almost bashful, "You're welcome, ma'am." By noon, word seemed to have spread without a single text or whisper. It was something older, quieter, respect. Mark realized travels faster when it's earned through sacrifice. Still, not everyone adjusted easily. Around 12:30, a group of teenagers, probably from the high school down the road, wandered into the store, laughing too loud, shoving each other, acting like they owned the place. Mark kept a wary eye on them. Emily, meanwhile, stayed steady, scanning cans of soda and bags of chips without flinching. Then he heard it, one muttered comment from a boy in a ball cap, just loud enough to be cruel. "Bet she got that leg blown off doing something stupid." Mark stiffened instantly, heart pounding, but before he could react, another voice cut through the noise. It wasn't Samuel Green this time. It was an old woman near the bakery, sharp-eyed and firm, who turned toward the boys and said, "You'll wish you had half her courage when life comes for you, boy." The teenagers froze, mumbling apologies. Suddenly, very interested in the cereal aisle, Emily kept her focus forward, but Mark caught the tiny lift of her shoulders, a breath she let out like she'd been holding it for years. He smiled to himself. Lakewood was slow to move, but once its heart turned, it turned full. Just before Emily's shift ended, Mark decided he couldn't let the day pass without doing something. Not for sympathy, not for pity, but because silence had been too common for too long. He grabbed a Sharpie and a sheet of printer paper. With careful, deliberate strokes, he wrote 4 simple words. "Thank you for standing." He didn't ask permission. He didn't hold a meeting. He simply taped the sign above. Register 2, where everyone could see it. When Emily returned from her 15-minute break, she paused in front of it. Her hands, calloused and sure, trembled slightly as she traced the words with her fingers. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. Mark just tipped his chin toward her and said, "Shift's almost over." "You want me to cover while you head out early?" Emily looked around at the customers, smiling at her, at the boy who gave her a shy thumbs up from the dairy section, at the old veteran's cap. Samuel Green had left sitting on the counter like a silent salute. She straightened her back, her prosthetic clicking lightly against the tile. "No, sir," she said. "I think I'll stay a little longer today." Mark grinned. Glad to hear it. Outside, the sun dipped lower behind the mountains, casting the parking lot in a soft gold. The wind carried the scent of fresh rain, and somewhere far off, a train whistled its lonely call across the valley. Inside Summit Market, a quiet kind of battle had been fought that day. Not with shouting, not with fists, but with truth. With kindness, with courage, too stubborn to sit down, too proud to hide. And for the first time since she'd come to Lakewood, Emily Carter wasn't just seen. She was honored. She was home. The next morning, the sun crept over Lakewood with a crispness that promised a colder season was near. Yellow and red leaves scattered across the sidewalk outside Summit Market, swirling in lazy circles with each breath of wind. Mark Lawson arrived early as usual, keys jangling in his hand as he unlocked the front doors. He paused for a moment on the threshold, taking in the quiet hum of the town waking up. There was something different in the air today. Not just the shift of seasons, something quieter, deeper. A change that didn't come from weather, but from hearts. Inside the store smelled of fresh bread and brewed coffee, the familiar scents wrapped around Mark like an old, comfortable jacket. He wasn't surprised to see Emily Carter already inside setting up her register, methodical as always. She wore the same Summit Market navy polo shirt, her prosthetic hidden beneath faded jeans. But today there was a difference you couldn't quite put into words. She moved the same efficient, steady yet lighter, as if some invisible burden had been peeled from her shoulders. Mark lifted a hand in greeting. Emily answered with a small nod, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks. It was another day, but not quite the same. The early rush came and went, teachers picking up last-minute supplies, a rancher grabbing dog food in a six-pack, retired couples walking slowly down the cereal aisle arm in arm. The town kept breathing in its own small, reliable rhythm. But there was a new awareness now. Customers looked Emily in the eye when they spoke to her. Some smiled longer, some paused to say thank you, some didn't say anything, but their faces said enough. Mark watched it all unfold quietly from behind the service counter, pretending to be buried in paperwork but missing nothing. At around 10 o'clock, the bell above the door jingled and a tall figure stepped inside. Mark looked up. It was a man in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, lean and hardened, the kind of man whose posture gave away a military past even before you saw the worn army jacket. His boots echoed slightly on the floor as he walked, carrying a small brown paper bag tucked under one arm. He didn't browse, he didn't dawdle. He walked straight toward Register 2, straight toward Emily. Mark felt the shift immediately. Felt Emily go still like a taut wire. The man stopped in front of her register, laid the brown bag gently on the counter. He took off his cap, pressing it to his chest. "Emily Carter," he asked, voice low but steady. Emily straightened a fraction. "That's me." The man reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, edges soft and worn from being carried too long. He held it out with both hands like something sacred. "My brother." The words caught, and he had to swallow before continuing. "My brother served with youth Afghanistan. His name was Luke Henderson." Mark saw it, the flicker of recognition in Emily's eyes. A wound hidden too deep to ever fully close. The man kept speaking rough and honest. "He didn't make it, but before he was gone, he told me about you. Said if I ever found you, I needed to say something." He pushed the paper closer. "It's from him." Emily's hand moved slow and careful, taking the letter like she might shatter if she touched it wrong. She unfolded it carefully, smoothing the creases. Mark could only see the back of the paper. Not the words, but he could imagine words written in a hurry, in a dusty outpost across the world. Words meant to outlive the man who wrote them. Emily read in silence. One line, too. Her mouth pressed tight, her jaw set hard, but she didn't look away. When she finished, she pressed the letter to her chest, closing her eyes for a long, still moment. The man across the counter waited, cap still gripped tightly against his ribs, his throat bobbing as he swallowed emotion. "Thank you," Emily said finally, her voice rough but strong. "Thank you for bringing this." The man shook his head, eyes shining. "No, ma'am. Thank you for everything." For a few heartbeats, neither of them moved, neither of them needed to. They were soldiers, separated by different wars, different losses, but bound by the same invisible oath. We carry each other's burdens. Finally, the man nodded once, solemn, and turned away. The bell chimed soft and slow as he left. Emily stood there for a long moment, the letter clutched in one hand, the brown paper bag still untouched on the counter. Then quietly, almost like a breath, she tucked the letter carefully into her apron pocket, straightened her shoulders, turned back to her register. Not a tear fell, not a sob escaped. She simply kept going, because that's what warriors do. Mark realized the whole store had fallen into a kind of reverent hush. Even the usual beep of the scanners sounded muted. Across the produce section, an old man with a faded Vietnam veteran ball cap lifted a trembling hand and gave a slow, deliberate salute. Emily saw him, and for the first time since Mark had known her, she let herself respond. She brought her hand up, not a full salute, but a quiet, respectful nod, Acknowledging everything they both knew without needing to say it, Mark felt a lump climb into his throat. He turned away, pretending to adjust a display of oranges, but nothing could hide the truth. Today wasn't just another morning at Summit Market. Today, Emily Carter wasn't just the woman at Register 2. Today, everyone saw her for who she really was, a living monument. Not to tragedy, but to survival. To honor, to strength that didn't need banners or medals. And for the first time in a long time, Lakewood remembered what gratitude was supposed to look like. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy, it was a quiet salute from across a produce aisle. It was a paper letter tucked against a beating heart. It was a town that had almost forgotten how to say thank you. Finally remembering Emily. Carter didn't need their pity, she never had. All she ever needed, all she ever deserved was respect. And today at long last, she had it. By the time the lunch rush hit, Summit Market was alive with the low hum of conversation carts rattling over worn tiles and the occasional ding of the register. But even amid the everyday noise, something about the place felt different. Mark Lawson stood near the bakery section, rearranging a display of cinnamon rolls, but his mind wasn't on pastries. His eyes kept drifting to Register 2, to Emily Carter. She moved through her tasks with the same quiet efficiency, but there was a difference now. Customers approached her line without hesitation. Some even went out of their way to choose her. Mark noticed it in small moments, a nod of respect, a lingering smile, an extra thank you at checkout. It wasn't pity, it was acknowledgement. And Emily, for her part, received it with grace. She didn't bask in it, didn't shrink from it. She simply accepted it the way she accepted everything, steady, unshaken. At 12:45 p.m., Mark saw Samuel Green again, the retired mailman who had stood up for Emily the day before, shuffling down aisle 3 with a basket full of apples and peanut butter crackers. Mark smiled to himself. Samuel had always been a fixture in town, but lately he seemed more like a sentinel, quietly watching over things. Samuel got in Emily's line again. As he unloaded his basket, he leaned closer and said something that made Emily's lips twitch into a real, genuine smile. One that reached her eyes. Mark didn't catch the words, but he caught the spirit of them. Encouragement, solidarity, quiet, friendship. It made him feel proud in a way that surprised him with its strength, but not everyone was adjusting so easily. At 1:15, just as Emily was finishing up another transaction, a sharp voice cut through the hum of the store. "Is this seriously what we've come to?" Mark's head snapped up. A woman stood in line, mid-50s, expensive haircut, manicured nails, gripping a designer purse, like it might save her from drowning. She wore a tailored jacket far too formal for Lakewood, and an expression so sour it could curdle milk. She was staring at Emily with open disdain. "Hiring people like this," the woman said, voice high and carrying. "It's unprofessional. It's upsetting." A hush fell over the nearby shoppers. Someone dropped a can of peas, the clatter echoing unnaturally loud. Mark started moving before he even realized it, anger rising hot in his chest. But he wasn't the first. Samuel Green. Samuel, with his crooked back and worn boots, stepped away from his cart and planted himself between the woman and Emily. "You watch your mouth, ma'am," Samuel said, voice calm but edged with iron. "That person you're talking about, she's got more courage in her little finger than you've got in your whole body." The woman recoiled, sputtering, "I have every right to." "No, you don't." Samuel cut her off sharply. "Not here, not today." More customers were gathering now, silent but present, a wall of quiet witnesses. Emily stood behind the register, frozen for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the scanner. Mark reached them just as Samuel turned back to Emily. "You don't have to say anything, Missy," Samuel said softly, just for her. "You already said enough by surviving." Emily blinked rapidly, fighting for composure. The woman, realizing the crowd was not on her side, huffed loudly, grabbed her designer purse tighter, and stormed out. The automatic doors, heels clicking furiously against the tile. As soon as she was gone, a soft ripple of applause broke out. It wasn't loud, it wasn't showy. It was a handful of people. Real people standing up in the only way they knew how. For dignity, for respect. Emily pressed a hand to her chest over the spot where the soldier's letter still rested in her apron pocket. Mark stepped up beside her, offering a small nod. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Emily took a shaky breath and nodded. "Yeah," she whispered, "I'm okay." And somehow she really was. That night, after the store closed and the last receipt was tallied, Mark found himself lingering behind at Summit Market. The aisles were darkened, the hum of the freezers, The only sound, he wandered toward register 2, toward the brown paper bag that still sat there, forgotten in the rush of the day. He opened it carefully. Inside was a simple hand-carved wooden plaque. 3 words burned into the surface with careful strokes. Still standing strong, Mark traced the letters with his thumb, throat tight. It wasn't just a gift, it was a reminder, a testimony, a promise. He thought about mounting it on the wall maybe above. Register 2. Thought about making it permanent so that anyone who walked into Summit Market would know that here strength wasn't measured in appearances or in the number of steps you could take without a limp. It was measured in heart, in resilience, in the quiet refusal to quit. Mark smiled to himself, feeling something settle deep in his chest. Tomorrow, he decided, tomorrow he would find a hammer and a few good nails. Because Emily Carter wasn't just still standing, she was carrying them all forward. The next few days at Summit Market unfolded like a second spring. Word had spread about what happened with Emily Carter, not through gossip, but through pride. Stories traveled from the diner to the gas station, from the barber shop to the church pews. Stories about a woman who had worn the uniform, who had given up part of her body but never her spirit. A woman who showed up every morning, stood behind that register, and gave her best without asking for sympathy or applause. In a town like Lakewood that mattered, more than people realized, Mark Lawson could feel the shift every time he looked around his store. People lined up at Register 2 now, sometimes even bypassing open registers just to have Emily ring them up. Customers brought her coffee, little kids drew her pictures. Someone anonymously left a bouquet of sunflowers with a note that said simply, "You are seen, you are honored." Mark had hung the wooden plaque above her register the morning after he found it in the bag, still standing strong. It caught the light just right, and every person who checked out with Emily saw it. But even good change has a way of drawing out the ones who resent it. It happened on a Friday afternoon, right as the weekend crowd started to roll in. Emily was working her usual shift, the store buzzing around her when the door swung open hard enough to jingle the bell like a fire alarm. A man stormed in, heavy-set, red-faced, wearing a jacket embroidered with some company logo. He stomped straight toward the service desk, ignoring everyone else. Mark, stacking a display of canned beans nearby, straightened immediately. He knew that look, trouble. The man slammed his hands on the counter, rattling the donation jar for the local animal shelter. "You the manager?" he barked. Mark wiped his hands calmly on his apron. "Yes, sir. What can I help you with?" The man jabbed a thick finger toward Emily, who was helping an elderly woman bag her groceries at Register 2. "That crippled girl?" He spat the word like it tasted foul. "She scanned my wife's groceries yesterday. Took twice as long. My wife came home in tears, embarrassed." Mark's heart hammered once, twice, and then steadied. He kept his voice level. "I'm sorry your wife had a difficult experience," he said evenly. "But Emily is one of our best employees. She's efficient, she's respectful, and she deserves the same respect in return." The man's face darkened, and for a moment Mark thought he might reach across the counter. "She shouldn't be out here where decent folks can see her," the man hissed. "It's disgusting. She belongs." He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't have to. The silence that fell over Summit Market was deafening. Every head turned, every eye locked on the scene at the front of the store. Emily, who had finished helping the elderly woman, stood motionless behind her register, her hands folded calmly. She didn't flinch. She didn't lower her eyes. She just stood there, still standing strong. Samuel Green, who happened to be thumbing through the discount produce bin, stepped forward again. But this time he wasn't alone. Other customers, too young, old mothers, farmers, teachers, quietly left their carts and formed a semicircle near the front. Mark looked at the man and spoke, his voice firm and carrying. "In this store, sir, we value service, we value sacrifice, we value character." He nodded toward Emily. "And we don't tolerate hatred, not toward our employees, not toward anyone." The man opened his mouth, but Mark wasn't done. "If that's a problem for you," he continued, "calm as a mountain, you're welcome to take your business elsewhere." A beat of tense silence, then someone clapped sharp and singular. Then another, until the whole store echoed with applause. The angry man turned scarlet, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out, the bell above the door jangling in his wake. When he was gone, the applause didn't die immediately. It lingered, swelling like a tide. Mark looked over at Emily. For a moment, she stood frozen, overwhelmed, caught between disbelief and gratitude. Then slowly she smiled, a small, shy, luminous thing. Mark felt his throat tighten and looked away, pretending to check the printer paper behind the counter. The town of Lakewood had drawn a line that day, and it had drawn it on the side of grace. Later that evening, after the last customer had left and the floors had been mopped, Emily found herself standing in front of the plaque above her register. She traced the words again, just like she had that first day, still standing strong. Mark leaned against the nearby counter, arms crossed loosely. "You know," he said casually, "I was thinking we could add a second plaque." Emily raised an eyebrow, intrigued. Mark smiled. "Maybe something simple, something true." He walked over, tapped the wood lightly. "Strength has many faces," he said. Emily chuckled softly, a warm, rich sound that filled the empty store. "I like that," she said. Mark nodded. "Good. Because around here, we need reminders." He paused, then added quieter, "And people to remind us." Emily looked around the dim, quiet store, the place that had against all odds become her home. She thought of Samuel's salute, of the old man's letter, of the little girl who had left her a hand-drawn picture of a superhero with a metal leg. She thought of survival, of scars, of the way some battles left no visible wounds but carved themselves deep all the same. Strength has many faces, and one of them today was hers, Emily. Carter smiled, tucked the letter deeper into her apron pocket, and turned off the lights. Another day survived, another day honored, still standing strong and ready for whatever came next. Saturday mornings in Lakewood carried a special kind of stillness. Families lingered longer over breakfast. Kids played on front lawns. The farmers' market at the town square buzzed with easy chatter and the scent of fresh apples and hay. At Summit Market, the day began a little differently. Mark Lawson unlocked the doors just before 8, expecting another normal Saturday rush. But when he stepped inside, he found something waiting for him at the front counter. A small envelope. No name, no decoration. Just a plain white envelope taped carefully to the base of the register where Emily worked. Mark peeled it off gently, his name handwritten across the front in small, careful letters. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No threats, no complaints, no hate. Just a simple request, Mark. If you could find a way, we'd like to honor her properly. No speeches, no fanfare, just real gratitude. From all of us who noticed even when we didn't know how to say it. There was no signature, but Mark didn't need one. He looked up, heart heavy and hopeful all at once. Some debts couldn't be repaid, but some kindnesses could be passed forward. He folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his pocket. The idea formed almost instantly, simple fitting. Exactly what Emily would never ask for, but everything she deserved. By noon, Mark had pulled together a handful of trusted friends. Samuel Green, 2 high school teachers, Pastor Whitmore from the town church, and even Officer Daniels from the local police. They huddled behind the bakery counter, whispering over coffee and scribbled notes. "We can't make it about the scars," Pastor Whitmore said firmly. "It has to be about the strength." Samuel nodded. "She ain't broken. She's whole in ways most people ain't," Mark agreed. "It has to be quiet, genuine. Nothing flashy." They debated logistics, timing, how to make it happen without tipping Emily off. After all, the woman had a sixth sense for trouble and for attention she didn't want. Finally, they had a plan, something small, something honest, something that said, "We see you, we honor you, we're better because of you." Sunday morning dawned clear and golden. At Summit Market, things seemed normal enough. Emily arrived early, clocked in without fuss, and began her shift as usual. But as the morning wore on, a subtle change crept into the air. Customers came in more than usual for a Sunday. Families, couples, older folks who didn't normally shop on weekends, and they all lined up at register too. Emily scanned groceries with her usual quiet precision, but even she began to notice the patterns. The long lines at her register, the extra smiles, the kids who waved shyly, the people who lingered just a little longer to say, "Thank you, ma'am," with an earnestness that couldn't be faked. She frowned slightly, glancing over at Mark behind the counter, but he just shrugged innocently and kept organizing a display of chewing gum. At precisely noon it happened. The bell over the door jingled not once but 3 times in quick succession. Emily looked up. 3 men entered the store wearing full dress uniforms. Army, Navy, Marines, their shoes gleamed, their hats sat square on their heads, their medals caught the light and threw it back like tiny stars. The store went utterly still. Emily's hand froze on a box of cereal she was scanning. The men didn't speak. They didn't need to. They walked slow, deliberate through the gathered crowd, weaving between carts and shelves until they reached register 2. The Marine stepped forward. First, he removed his hat and saluted sharp, clean. Full of weight and meaning, the army soldier followed, then the sailor. 3 salutes, 3 silent honors. Emily's mouth parted, but no sound came out. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the cereal box down. Samuel Green appeared beside her, reaching into his pocket and pulling out something small and round. A coin engraved simply with the words, Valor Service Home. He pressed it into Emily's palm, closing her fingers gently over it. Pastor Whitmore stepped forward next, laying a hand on her shoulder. You carried us, he said softly, so only she and a few nearest could hear. Now let us carry you. The crowd behind them stood quietly, no shouting. No speeches, just a forest of bowed heads, hats removed, hands over hearts. Respect not demanded but freely given. Mark swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. Emily stood very still for a long moment. Then with visible effort she lifted her head. Her voice when it came was raw but steady. I just did what anyone would have done, she said quietly. Samuel smiled gently. Maybe, ma'am, but you did it when it mattered. She closed her fingers tighter around the coin, looked out at the faces, some familiar, some strangers who had come not to pity her but to stand with her. And something inside her, something that had been locked away since the day she lost her leg, since the day she came home to silence and stares, finally cracked open. Not broken, freed. Emily Carter straightened her back, her prosthetic clicking softly against the worn tile. She nodded once crisp, sure at the 3 uniformed men, returned their salutes with the same sharpness, the same pride. And for the first time, she let herself believe she was still a soldier. She was still needed. She was still home. The applause started softly, not for show, not for drama, just hands clapping, slow and sure, carrying gratitude from heart to hand. Mark clapped too, throat burning, chest aching with something fierce and beautiful. This was how Lakewood said thank you. Not in grand monuments, not in parades, but in the simple act of standing with someone who had already stood so long, so bravely, so alone. Today they stood with her, and they would keep standing. As long as it took, the days that followed the quiet salute at Summit Market didn't change the world. The news didn't send reporters flooding into Lakewood. There were no viral videos, no flashing headlines, but something more important happened. Lakewood changed quietly, permanently. The people who had once looked away when they saw Emily Carter now looked her in the eye. Some smiled, some simply nodded. Some, like Samuel Green, found small ways to say what words never quite could. And Emily kept showing up. Every morning Register 2 came alive with her steady presence, her soft good morning, her patient scanning of groceries, her quiet courage standing tall behind that counter. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She was seen. And more than that, she was respected. It was a week after the salute when Mark Lawson received a phone call that would change everything again. It was from City Hall. Mark, it's Mayor Preston. Listen, we've been hearing about what's happening over at Summit, and we have an idea. A way to say thank you not just to Emily, but to all our veterans. Mark listened, heart thudding hard against his ribs. When he hung up, he smiled wide and real for the first time in days. It was perfect. Saturday arrived crisp and bright. Instead of clocking in at her usual time, Emily Carter was asked gently, insistently, to take the morning off. At first she resisted. She didn't want a fuss. She didn't want attention. But Mark only smiled and said, sometimes, Emily, it's not about what you want, it's about what you've earned. Reluctantly, she agreed. She wore her simplest clothes, a clean navy blouse, jeans, her hair neatly pulled back. No medals, no uniform, just herself. At 10 a.m., she stood outside Summit Market, confused by the gathering crowd. Families, veterans in faded uniforms, little kids waving tiny American flags, the mayor standing awkwardly near the edge holding a folder. Emily looked at Mark, bewildered. Mark just smiled. Come on. He led her through the crowd, which parted without hesitation, offering her a clear path. At the entrance to Summit Market, someone had draped a long white cloth over the wall, over the spot where the wooden plaque had once hung. Now there was something new underneath. The mayor stepped forward, clearing his throat. Today, he said, voice steady, we honor not just a veteran, but a neighbor, a friend. Someone who taught us all that strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just shows up every day and refuses to quit. He nodded towards Emily. She reminded us that courage isn't about medals. It's about standing strong even when no one's looking, even when the world isn't kind. He gestured to the covered plaque, Lakewood owes a debt it can never repay. But we can remember, we can honor, and we can promise never to look away again. With that, he reached up and pulled the cloth free. The new plaque gleamed in the morning sun, hand-carved, simple, powerful. It read Emily Carter Memorial Register. In honor of all who serve seen and unseen. Strength has many faces, courage stands quietly. For a moment, Emily could only stare. The whole town seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then she lifted her head, her eyes shining but clear. She stepped forward and placed her hand on the plaque, fingers splaying over the carved letters as if anchoring herself to something solid and true. No speeches, no parade. Just a woman and a town finally seeing each other fully. Samuel Green started the applause this time, a single clap that echoed like a shot. Then another and another, until the entire square rang with the sound of hands meeting. Hands, a living heartbeat of gratitude. Emily turned facing them. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Just 6 words spoken clear and strong. Thank you for standing with me. And somehow those 6 words were enough, more than enough. Later that afternoon, as the crowd dispersed and the regular rhythm of life returned, Emily sat on the bench outside Summit Market, sipping a cup of coffee. Mark had forced into her hands. Mark sat beside her, his legs stretched out, his own coffee cooling in the Montana breeze. They watched the world go by slow. Familiar. Beautiful. Finally, Mark broke the silence. You ever think about what's next? He asked. Emily smiled faintly. Next, he nodded. You've done more than survive, Emily. You've built something here. People listen when you speak. Maybe there's more you could do. She tilted her head, considering. Maybe community work. Maybe veteran outreach. Maybe even just being someone younger, soldiers could look up to. She didn't know yet, but for the first time in a long, long time, she wanted to find out. Maybe she said finally, maybe I'm not done fighting, just fighting different battles now. Mark grinned. Lakewood's lucky to have you. Emily chuckled. I'm lucky to have Lakewood. The breeze lifted the edge of the new plaque and the sunlight caught the carved letters, making them glow. Strength has many faces. Courage stands quietly. And sometimes courage doesn't roar. It simply shows up. It refuses to quit. It keeps standing. Just like Emily Carter. Just like all the quiet heroes who walk among us unnoticed until we remember to look closer. And when we finally see them, really see them, the world becomes just a little bit braver too. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way. Often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.